Hey everyone, how are we? Okay, really, that's really enthusiastic. Really good to be with you guys, but we are glad to be here. And if you don't know me, I know some of you are here for the first time. My name's Brian. I'm the high school pastor here. And what we are doing right now is we're in the second week of a teaching series that we've called The Mountain. And if you weren't here last week, I'll catch you up real quick. What we started with last week is we're going to take 8 weeks to look at this part of the Bible called the Sermon on the Mount. And this is just Jesus' most famous sermon. It's a sermon Jesus gives on this mountain, and he's telling his disciples what it means to live a life where you trust God with everything. And so we said last week, we'll repeat again this week and over and over and over again, that this teaching, like what Jesus has to say, and ultimately this sermon series is really for you if you're someone who struggles with anxiety or struggles with stress or feels just kind of worn out with all the stuff this world has against you. And so that's what we hope to do over the next 8 weeks. And so, man, this week we're going to pick up with a topic that maybe you've never really talked about before, maybe really never heard about in church. It's certainly not something we've talked about a lot, but I think it's something important. And what Jesus is going to do is he's going to take two things tonight and push them together and talk about them in the same sentence. And those two things are murder and anger. And so that's what we're going to take a look at tonight. We're going to take a look at what Jesus has to say to us about murder and anger. And so in order to just start to get our heads around this, I want to look at the source of all wisdom and goodness in this world aside from the Bible, and that would be Twitter. And so we're going to just look at some really brilliant tweets. When you search anger, you just find this wonderful just treasure trove of things. Like it starts like this. This sage here says, I had the dumbest conversation with my mom. I'm so angry. Would you throw your hand in the air if you've ever had a conversation with your mom where you have left angry? Okay, we have an honest church tonight. That's good. We have an honest church. If you didn't raise your hand, you either have the strangest relationship with your mom or you're just wonderful. But listen, or you're lying. But here's what happens here. I want us to think about this because I think here's what tends to happen. We tend to think I had a conversation with my mom, that she was being frustrating, and so I'm angry. And that's what we tend to do. But what I'm going to do right now is I want to show you a number of tweets, and I want to try to tie it all together to show that your anger in a given moment is not random. It's not isolated. It's not a random thing, but it's something tied to something much deeper. So here's what happens. When we have a conversation with our mom or with our dad or someone in our family, and we leave angry for one reason and one reason alone. What? We leave for one... Shh. We leave angry for one reason alone. That reason is because things don't go the way we thought they would go, the way we want them to go, because ultimately our will is thwarted. When we leave angry from a conversation with our parents, it's because we see the world in a certain way. They don't see the world in a certain way, and that frustrates us. It runs up against our desire, our will for this world, so that when you say to your mom, I want to go to this movie, and she says no, your way you want the world to work is that you get to go to the movie or you get to hang out with your friends, and she's running up against that. It causes you to be angry when your will, when your desire is thwarted. Let's just see the next one here. This next one says, I'm not scared about the clowns. It honestly makes me so angry. Do something productive. Who benefits from this? It's not funny. So this is what this person has to say. And so you see this person who has to say this thing about the clowns. They're clearly angry about the clowns, right? And all of us, I think, unless you're just crazy person, are angry about the clowns. Like there is no good business, because here's why. None of us desire clowns. Like none of us are like, I hope I go to bed tonight, wake up in the morning and see a clown in my bed. No, like none of us hope that. Here, but then get this. This person's angry, but then what happens? That stirs up anger in someone else, because clearly this next person goes, honestly, shut up. And the next person just in all caps says, shut up. Why? Because they're angry. So next tweet. Next person says, I don't understand how my mom can get so angry about my closet being messy. If you stay out of my stuff, you won't see my mess. It's easy. I'm hearing some hallelujahs. But here's what's happening, right? What you've got is two people. What you've got is two people with two different ways of seeing the world. You've got mom who says it doesn't matter if no one ever sees it, it needs to be clean, so clean it. And then you've got this person saying, no, mom, if no one's ever seeing it, you just stay out of my stuff, it won't be an issue. So you've got two different people, right? Seeing the world in a different way, wanting things to go in a different direction, desiring different things. And when those two different desires run into conflict, you get anger. Anger is something that comes up, it stirs up in us. It spontaneously comes up in us when we are thwarted from getting our way, when there's an obstacle between us and our will, our desire, what we want, the way we want things to go. Next tweet says, I'm so angry they better redo the whole HOCO week. This time with better themes or something. It's a real profound tweet, but here's a person. Here's a person angry about their homecoming week. Here's a person who saw things going a little differently and it didn't go quite the way they had hoped it would go. Here's an individual who's not pleased with the way something went because it didn't go the way they wanted it to go. Next tweet. I'm sorry that tweet made me really angry for some reason. We don't know anything about the tweet. Here's simply what we know. Someone sees something and it makes them angry because that happens, right? Like, it's not just when someone interacts with us and thwarts our will. And it's not just when someone gets in the way of what we want to do. It's when we see something in the world that doesn't seem right. You see a tweet or you hear about a story or you see something on TV and it's not the way you want things to be and it makes you angry. See, anger happens when the world doesn't work the way we want it to work. Next tweet. It says this, it's cold and I'm angry about it. Like, here's an individual and it's cold, so theoretically, if it went the way she wanted, it would be warmer and she would be happier, perhaps, probably not. Next tweet, please. The video won't download, I'm angry. How many of you have ever been sitting with a video? I have no idea what's occurring in the room, but it's okay. How many of you are sitting with your phone and something's not working and it's not loading and you're looking at it and it's not loading and we just have this expectation that we should be able to press a button and everything should be able to work in a minute, and this guy's angry and then he says, now my iPad froze, ha 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 ha. I think that's ironic, I don't know. Next tweet. Next tweet. Oh, that's the last tweet, okay. So here's what I'm trying to point out. A lot of these examples are silly, and they're silly for a reason, because when it's silly, we can look at it and start to identify that all these people are angry, and they're angry about, for the most part, very, very small things, very insignificant things. But what I would try to argue, and what I want you to see tonight, is that whether it's a very small, insignificant, kind of silly thing, or a very big thing in your life, like whatever it is, your anger is not random. And my assumption, by the way, would be this, that every single one of you in this room struggles with anger. And I don't mean you're just like this rageful, angry person punching holes in the wall, but I would just say, anyone in this room who can say in the last year there's never been a moment where they've just been so outraged at something, so frustrated, so angry, so mad about something, you're just living a very different life than we are. But I would say most people are just gonna struggle with this constant thing where people are stepping on your toes, getting in your way. People are doing things that are frustrating you, making you angry, and making you mad. And what I want you to see tonight is that it's not random. See, most of the time when we get angry, we think, well, I'm really justified in this moment because it's cold, or I'm justified in this moment because I had a bad conversation with my mom, or I'm justified because this stupid video won't download. We always have a reason that we're angry, but the reason beneath the reason is because the world isn't working the way we want it to work. And if people would just do the things we want them to do, if they would just behave in the way we want them to behave, if they would just say yes to the things we want them to say yes to, we wouldn't be angry, which shows us something. That anger is not fundamentally about anger. Anger is about who is actually in control of the world. And that for you to deal with anger in your life is not simply to be like, oh, I'm not going to be mad anymore. It's to recognize the need that each and every single one of us, myself included, have this need, this impulse we have to control everything that's happening in the world. And Jesus tonight has some words for us. Jesus is going to talk to us about anger and what that might look like for our lives. So I just want you to hear some of the most famous words ever spoken by Jesus in his most famous sermon. It begins this way in Matthew chapter 5, verse 21. It'll be right up here on the screen. It said, "You've heard it said long ago, to the people long ago, that you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." And so Jesus is going to stand up here and say a pretty self-evident thing. I'm guessing that Jesus' original audience, there weren't a lot of objections, like a guy in the back, like, I don't know. And I'm guessing in this room, we don't have a lot of people who are like, I don't know, murder's like interesting. I don't think a lot of you are like, well, it's an interesting prospect. If it is, please come talk to us. We'd love to have a gracious conversation with you and the police. But truly, murder is not something that there's a lot of moral disagreement on. And Jesus stands in front of this group of people and says, listen, you've heard it said in the days of old, don't murder. What Jesus is probably referring to here is the Old Testament, thousands of years ago, God giving the law to his people, don't murder. And here's what's really easy for us people, especially when we're religious people, especially if you've been a Christian for a while. It's easy for us to go, okay, the command is, don't murder, don't kill anyone. And I haven't killed anyone, so I'm doing well on that command and to move on. But Jesus isn't going to let us off the hook that easily. Jesus is going to look deeper than the simple act and the horrific act of murdering something. He's going to go deeper than that. And I just want you to hear what he says, because you might be surprised by it. He says, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in the danger of the fire of hell. So Jesus is going to say, listen, if you think murder's the thing you have to avoid, you've missed it. The truth is, Jesus doesn't want you to murder, but then he's going to go much deeper than that. He's going to tell you that the person who's angry with their brother, like the person who's angry, like when you're angry with someone, you are up for the same type of punishment that the murderer is. That you would be brought to judgment, that would be an issue. Jesus says this, and then in case he was unclear, he goes on to say, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. Now, I'm guessing a lot of people in this room don't struggle walking around like a Raka. Like, that's not like a thing you do. And if you're confused, like, what does Raka mean? Here's what I believe. There's a lot of discussion on it, but it would seem that in the ancient Middle East, you're in this very hot, very dusty place, and to say Raka isn't really a word you would say as much as a sound you would make. It would, in fact, be the sound you would make in the ancient Middle East if you were going to spit at someone. You would go, sorry, front row. But you know what I mean? Like it's a sound, it's a spitting sound, it's a sound of disrespect. Even in our culture today, spitting at someone is just kind of like, you don't do that. But even more so in the ancient world, it was just kind of this sign of disrespect. And Jesus is saying, if you're the type of person who just has complete contempt for people, who spits at people, who doesn't respect the very lives that human beings live, it says you're going to be answerable to the court. But then in case you're confused, he goes a step further. And he says, anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. And that just sits there, right? Like it's just sort of this overwhelming, like Jesus just went from don't murder to don't be angry to don't spit at people to if you say fool, you're in the danger of the fire of hell. And yet I just point out a few things. I don't think Jesus here is really getting at you can never say the words you and fool next to each other or boom, you go to hell. Because in that case, I would be going to hell because I just said it. Like I don't think Jesus is trying to be like, how can I combine two words that they should never accidentally say? How can I say something really outlandish so that they go, wait, have I ever said you fool? Some of you are sitting there thinking right now, have I ever called the person next to me a fool? Like I've called them an idiot, I've called them more so, but a fool, have I ever done that? And here's what I just say, that's not what Jesus is trying to do. Jesus is not trying to like ban a few more words from our language. Jesus is getting at something much deeper. Because to call someone a fool in the ancient world, and how it translates out here is kind of like you fool, which would mean like you foolish person, or like you were dancing like a fool, or something like that. I don't know what you kids these days say. But again, it's not that. This is not Jesus picking some more words that you're not allowed to say. Christian faith is not ultimately a list of things you're not supposed to say or do. But Jesus is getting at the heart of the issue, that the type of person who calls someone a fool is the type of person who has just a disrespect for life itself. And the type of person who just doesn't respect human life, the type of person who doesn't value humanity, who just doesn't value life. One of the most profound things about the Bible is that it values all lives. Like life itself matters. It's not a joke. It's not something small. It's not insignificant. To take a life matters. Like it just is a huge deal in the Bible. And Jesus is saying, if you're the type of person who has contempt for other human beings, meaning you just sit there and stew about how much you hate people, Jesus doesn't say you're going to hell. Notice, it does not say you will go to hell. It says that you're in danger of the fire of hell. Why? Because the type of person who knows and loves Jesus and who's been rescued from their sin can't turn around and hate the same people that Jesus rescued. So that Jesus is going to stand here and he's going to say, listen, you've heard it said in the days of old, don't kill anyone, like don't murder. But I'm going to say it's actually much more than that. It's about your emotion. It's about your anger. And I don't know, for some of you, you may have kind of grown up in a culture or in a household where it's like, whatever you want to feel is fine. Don't let anyone tell you how to feel. You just feel how you want to feel, and don't let anyone tell you differently. And Jesus is going to confront that. Jesus does not agree with the statement that no one should tell you how to feel. Jesus here is telling you how to feel. He is telling you that that feeling of anger within you is not a good thing, and it's in fact something that's going to lead you down a destructive path. And I think this is where a lot of people look at Jesus and go, I don't know if I agree with that. Because I'm angry and it wasn't my fault and someone stepped on my toes and someone did something frustrating to me. But here's just what I want to point out to you, that your anger, your emotion is much more powerful than you recognize. So I just want to say 3 statements for you to consider as you think about the weight that Jesus puts on anger here. These aren't statements out of the Bible. These are just things for you to consider. The first thing I want you to consider is this, that our emotions impact others even when we do not act on them. That our emotions impact others even when we don't act on them. The fact that you feel something impacts other people, and all of you know this is true if you've ever had a friend who's mad at you. You ever had a friend and they're just kind of acting weird? They're not like doing anything bad, but they're just kind of acting weird, and you ask them, how are you? And they're like, well, I'm fine. And if anyone ever says they're fine, they're clearly not fine. And they're upset, and then you just kind of end up talking, and then you realize, like, wait, are you mad at me? And then they look at you and say, actually, yeah, I'm really frustrated with you. In that moment, you are wounded just by the fact that they're mad at you. They've not done anything. It's not like they're like, yeah, I'm mad at you, and took out a club and hit you, or like, I'm mad at you and they kicked you in the shins. They have done nothing physically. They've not acted on their anger at all, and yet you're wounded by it. We can wound others not even by our actions, just by the way we feel. And then the flip side is true too, right? Like if you find out that there's a girl who's crushing on you or a guy who's crushing on you, and they've not done anything, they've not like sent you a text or sent you flowers or taken you on a date or anything at all, but you just find out that they're interested in you and they have feelings for you, aren't you flattered? Doesn't that impact you? They've not done anything at all, and yet their emotions, simply the way they feel, impacts you. And so here's just what I'd suggest to you. When Jesus starts to say, I don't want you to even be angry, it's not because he's just trying to control you for the sake of controlling you. It's because Jesus recognizes that your emotion, your anger is going to impact people. It's not just a private thing. You can't just say, well, it's my emotion, it doesn't impact anyone else. It most certainly does, and you can't avoid it. Next sentence. Our emotions determine how we treat others. So the other day, I'm driving home from work, and I'm driving back to my house, and it's been a long day here at the office, and I'm looking forward to just being home and eating dinner and relaxing. So I'm driving down Moore Park Road. I'm about to take a left on Flores, where I live. I'm sitting at the stoplight. Stoplight turns green. About 6 cars ahead of me go, but the car in front of me doesn't. And I look at the car in front of me, and I'm kind of like, why aren't they going? And then I realize that this guy's on his cell phone, which is, of course, like a totally normal thing. But in that moment, I'm frustrated. In this moment, he's obstructing my will. In this moment, I want to get home. In this moment, I'm just starting to build up this anger, and suddenly I just go, move, you idiot! Now, here's the question. I don't really understand how we could possibly say that our emotions don't impact the way we see others. See, in this moment, it was my anger, it was my issues, it was my stuff going on that just made me explode. I don't share that story because I'm like, oh, that's the way you should act. No, that's the exact type of anger that Jesus is preaching against here. That's the exact type of anger that Jesus is saying have nothing to do with that in your life. Why? Because our anger impacts the way we see people, it impacts the way we view people, and ultimately impacts the way we treat people. Because this guy is just sitting there, and he's probably not an idiot, right? Like he's probably just a guy like you and me who's always on our phones, and we're distracted by things, and that's what happens. But it causes me to view him with contempt and view him with hatred and be angry at him and be frustrated with him and do bad things. It's not even that I went and did something terrible, right? It's not like I even got out of the car and went and slashed his tires or like hit him with a baseball bat. Like none of that happened in that moment. And yet, don't miss this. In that little tiny moment, my anger, my emotion changed how I viewed another human being, and ultimately changed how I would have treated this person if I had interacted with him. And that's what happens. Like, please don't be foolish enough to believe, please don't be naive enough to believe that you can have this like raging anger inside of you and that it won't lead to you acting differently toward people. Please don't believe that you couldn't go down a road where you sincerely bring harm and damage into someone else's life. Like if you're someone who looks out at the world and sees people doing terrible things like murder or rape or abuse or genocide or horrible things like that, please do not put them in some other category as if they're some different type of human being who does stuff like this and you're this type of human being who would never do stuff like this. No, the worst people out there, the people who have done the most heinous things that have destroyed lives are people just like you and me. And they are people who have not dealt with their anger. They are people who have not dealt with the rage and madness and anger that is inside of them, and it leads them down dark roads. Don't ever believe for a second that your anger won't ultimately impact how you treat other human beings. And the last thing I'll say here, that our emotions shape the people we're becoming. Like our emotions shape the people we're becoming. And so maybe, again, you grew up in church and you sort of were under the belief that it's like, okay, I'm supposed to know some facts about God and then I'm supposed to do the right thing and how I feel about it is really irrelevant. They used to say in the Christian world, it's facts and then faith and then feelings are least important. And the only problem with this just continues to be the Bible. Because the Bible is going to say that your feelings are actually so significant. That your feelings, the way you feel, the way you're inclined toward people, the way you're inclined toward God actually shapes the person you're becoming. Again, we're just going to say this over and over, especially if you're new to faith or just checking us out. Christian faith is not about believing a bunch of facts about God and then trying to be a good person. Christian faith is ultimately about God shaping you and changing you from the inside out and making you more like Jesus. So that you would ultimately become someone who's not angry all the time, that you would ultimately become someone that looks more like Jesus, that you would become someone who's more at peace. For you to stand there and just say, well, I'm angry, but I'm not going to be angry someday. I'm just angry now because of my circumstances, is for you to miss the fact that your emotion is shaping who you are. And that you will become the type of person that you are acting like right now. You will become more of that, so that if you're this angry person who just walks around bitter at everyone and angry with your family and angry with your friends and angry with everyone you run into, you will continue for the rest of your life to become more and more bitter, more and more angry, and less like Jesus. But if you are someone who is at peace, who is totally filled with joy, who says, no, things are going to go wrong and they're not going to go the way I want to, but I trust Jesus and I'm walking in that, that is going to shape you into a person who becomes more and more and more like Jesus. One of the silliest things you can believe is that somehow you can just be this rotten, horrible, awful person now and suddenly you'll snap out of it later. Your emotion is shaping who you're becoming, and it matters infinitely. So that Jesus is not just after your behavior, he's after your heart. That's why he stands up there and says, listen, we all agree that murder is bad, right? Amen. Okay, don't be angry. Because it's going to lead you down a road that doesn't make you morally that much different than the murderers. Because it's going to lead you down a road that's going to twist your soul and make you just twisted up and angry and stressed out all the time. Jesus is not interested in your actions as much as he's interested in your heart. And that Christian faith is ultimately about who we are becoming. And my hope and my desire and the desire of the scriptures is that you would become more like Jesus. So that's where we land. That's where we land about what anger is and what anger is all about. And then Jesus is going to really start to look at this and look at this crowd standing before him and recognize that anger is a huge issue in the ancient world and it's a huge issue now. And so he's going to speak over us two different examples. Two different stories he's going to give us, brief little 2-sentence stories about how we can deal with the anger that's within us. Because if you're sitting here right now and you're recognizing that there's anger in your life, Jesus isn't just going to leave you hanging. Jesus is going to give you two specific ways to deal with it, two images to think about. And so I want you to see this here. It says in verse 23, it says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar, then go be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. And so Jesus here is referring to what's happening in the temple in the ancient world. If you don't know this, before Jesus and his sacrifice for our sins, that was the final, like the ultimate sacrifice, people would go into the temple every week, every month, every year, to different time frames, and they would offer sacrifices of their own. They would sacrifice animals to God to show that they would be forgiven of their sins. And Jesus is saying, if you're doing this, and again, this is not something we do anymore, so I just want you to shift this and translate this to, let's say, if you're in the high school room at 5 o'clock on Sunday night. If the band is up on stage and we're about to start singing, if you're in this room with your friends, let me just say it to you this way. If you're in the high school room at 5 o'clock and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, now notice this. It doesn't say that you have something against your brother or sister. It doesn't say that you're in the high school room and you're mad at someone, so this is the situation. No. This is you remembering or realizing that someone else in this church, maybe even someone else in this room right now, has something against you. Here's Jesus' command for you. He says, leave your gift at the front of the altar, go and be reconciled, and then come and offer your gift. What Jesus is saying is that you cannot come into the house of God and worship and have this big feud going on with someone else and also claim to worship, right? What Jesus is trying to get at is that if you have some big issue with someone else in this room or someone else in this church, your worship is going to be stifled. Your worship isn't going to happen the way it should, and here's why. Because I want you to see a conflict. I want you to see a conflict between you being a person who's so angry at someone and something went wrong and you're in this feud and there's this thing going on and you're so upset about it because they didn't do things the way you wanted them. They got in your way. They stepped on your toes. They said something they shouldn't have said. They did something they shouldn't have done. I want you to see the conflict between you believing that and then you coming into a place like this and worshiping and going, God, give me faith to trust what you say because I trust you, Jesus, and I believe in you and I believe you're in charge. I want you to see the conflict between you thinking that someone else is in the wrong and you're so mad because they should just behave the way you want them to behave, and then you coming into this room and going, God, be enthroned upon our praises because you're king and you're everything. There's a conflict here. You can't worship God as the king who's in charge of everything and at the same time believe that everyone should act the way you want them to act. And so what Jesus sees is this conflict here, and he goes, listen, if you have that type of conflict, before you keep singing, before you keep worshiping, go deal with this conflict. I remember I was a junior in high school, and it was my winter retreat, and we're at this chapel in the mountains, and the preacher's preaching on this exact thing, and he's talking about going and being reconciled with your brother, and his challenge was this. He said, we're about to sing, and if someone has anything against someone in this room, or there's some history or baggage, before you keep singing, just leave the room and go deal with it. And so in that moment, I go, oh, okay, and I didn't have anyone. I didn't have anyone I think I had heard. I didn't have anyone that I thought, okay, I've really stepped on their toes. I've really messed up their life. And so I just start singing, and then suddenly in the middle of the song, there's this tap on my shoulder, and this person says, no, we need to deal with this right now. And this person pulls me out of the room and starts confessing things to me about how frustrated he is with me and what I've done to hurt him. And these are things I've been totally unaware of. And I wish my response was just like, oh man, like I'm so, like I repent. But I wasn't. I was mad and I got defensive. So I'm mad and he's mad. But you know what we did in that moment? Before we went back into the chapel to keep singing, we talked it out. We cried it out. We yelled it out. We had to deal with it. We had to unpack everything and say, why'd you do that? And how'd you do this? Do you know how much that hurt me? I had to work through it. I just need to talk to someone in the room tonight who's got some massive conflict going on in your life with someone right now. It doesn't get better by ignoring it. Your conflict with your brother or with your sister or with your boyfriend or girlfriend or some former friend of yours doesn't get better by you ignoring it. It gets better by you dealing with it. And that's what Jesus is trying to say here. He's trying to say, stop coming into church and just pretending everything's okay. And I wonder if someone in this room just needs to go deal with a conflict this week. Perhaps you need to go deal with it tonight. Perhaps as we're singing at the end, you need to tap someone on the shoulder and say, let's go talk this out because this needs to end now. We're too good of friends for this to happen. This needs to stop. Something's gone wrong and we need to fix this. This is what Jesus has to say here. Stop ignoring the problem and go deal with it. Then the second story he gives, I want you to hear this. It says in verse 25, he says, settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. And so Jesus is describing a situation here where there's two people. It seems like one person owes the other person money. And so there's some kind of conflict there over money. And they're on their way, they're talking it through, but they're on their way and they're walking toward a judge. And the judge says, no, you owe him money. And so the judge hands him over to the officer, and the officer throws him in jail. And now everything has escalated because they chose not to deal with it early on. And Jesus says, deal with it while you're on your way, meaning don't let things escalate. Which just, of course, makes me think of, what can happen with a high school friendship, what can happen with a high school friend group. Again, this is stuff I've heard. It's probably not happening in any of your lives or your schools, but I've heard that at times, little tiny things that weren't a big deal at all have blown out of proportion into something massive. Well, like again, probably not happening in your life or your school, but I've heard there are times when someone says something and it hurts someone, and rather than just dealing with it there when it was a small thing, someone else told someone else who started talking about it, who started telling someone else about it, and now someone who doesn't even know any of the two people are talking about it because everyone hates drama except everyone loves drama, and then they're just talking about it, and everyone's angry and everyone's mad because now gossip is just going around and it's blown completely out of proportion after this itty-bitty thing. Again, not happening in your life, I'm sure. But again, when you listen to Jesus, what you're listening to is a man who's saying, deal with it early. Deal with it right away. Deal with it before it becomes this big, hairy thing. Some of you have this thing with someone in your life and they've been just kind of annoying you or frustrating you. Something's been going wrong. And rather than deal with it, you have this like grand strategy of just push it down. Like just pretend it's not an issue. Oh, it's fine. It's not an issue. And someday you're going to explode. Like you're going to snap. And Jesus is trying to say, be the type of person who deals with things early before they escalate. Because your anger will ultimately lead you down a road that will destroy you. It'll ultimately lead you down a road that will blow things way out of proportion and make things much worse. Again, I just have to talk to someone in the crowd tonight. And someone here just needs to believe that there's something going on in your life and you just need to deal with it now before it blows up. And this is what Jesus has to say. Again, there's no Jesus standing here saying it's not about what you feel, it's just about what you do. Feel the way you want to feel. It's not a big deal. Just don't hurt people. No. This is Jesus saying the way you feel matters deeply. The way you feel toward people is eternally significant. And the way you deal with your anger will shape the rest of your life. Because here's my guess. My guess is you don't want to be an angry person. If you're in this room and you would confess that you're an angry person, my guess is you don't want to be that. You don't want to wake up tomorrow angry. You don't want to wake up tomorrow frustrated with people. Maybe you're not even typically like an angry person, but I'm guessing like in those moments where you're just furious, you don't want to be that. And I still believe Jesus offers us a way out of that. Like here, Jesus offers us a way to deal with it when we are angry. But I think the thing about Jesus isn't just like be angry and then go deal with it. I think over time, the thing that Jesus is trying to get us to see is that we can actually become the type of people who don't get angry as easily. We can be the type of people who are actually peaceful in this world. These non-anxious, non-angry, calm, joyful people in this world. See, I want to show you one last tweet. And I saw this one, I just said, this is it, right? Like this person says, I've been getting really angry at everything and people over the smallest stuff, and I really hate feeling this way. And we're just going to leave this up on the screen because here's what I want you to see. The life that Jesus is calling you toward is the opposite of this. Like there is a life and there is a way of living that says I'm just angry at everyone over everything, and everything everyone does makes me mad and it frustrates me and I don't like it, and little tiny things make me mad and everything's getting on my nerves. There is a way of living that's this, and then there is the opposite, and that is the type of life where you abandon your control to King Jesus. Where you simply become the type of person who in huge things, like where you're gonna go to college and who you're gonna marry and what your career is gonna be and where you're gonna live, you trust Jesus with the huge things. And then you trust him with the itty bitty things. You trust him with whether or not your friend texts you back, or whether or not you get stuck in traffic, or whether or not you go in and get a little more homework than you expected and it ruins your weekend. Like whatever that little thing is, or whatever that massive, huge thing is, the least angry people in this world, the people who are least like this, the people who are the opposite of this, are the people who trust Jesus with all of it. The people who trust Jesus, meaning they believe that Jesus is king, he's enthroned, he's in charge. Everything that happens in my life happens because he allowed it to happen, and therefore I'm going to be okay. Therefore I'm going to be okay. The type of person who doesn't get angry is the type of person who trusts the will of God. And then I would just say this, if you're someone who struggles to trust the will of God, we've talked about this before, that perhaps at least you could trust the heart of God. To believe that the same God who sent Jesus to die for us, the same God who said, Jesus, you're going to go and you're going to rescue them from their sins because I love them and I want to work everything for my good and for our good and for his glory. Like he's going to do all of this for you. This is the heart of God toward you, that he would rescue and save you and make you whole. If you can't understand the will of God, would you at least trust the heart of God to say, I don't understand why this is happening, but I'm not going to get angry and I'm not going to get enraged and I'm not going to fly off the handle because I believe that Jesus is in charge. What if? What if you could lead the opposite of this life? What if you could be the type of person who says, I'm just really at peace with everything, even in the smallest stuff, and I love feeling this way? What if that could be you? And what if you could abandon your control, your need to be in charge, your need to get your way to King Jesus? What if you could be the type of person who trusts Jesus in every area of your life? And so I'm going to ask you guys, some of you, maybe not all of you, to respond to our message tonight and just respond to the words of Jesus. And here's how we're going to do that. If you weren't here last week, one of the things we're going to do every single Sunday for the next 6 weeks after this is we're going to end the sermons by just asking you to open your hands. And if you're new to us, this is not some creepy, weird, mystical thing. This is just us having this recognition that actually the most angry people in this world, the most angry people in this world are the people who have to cling on to everything, who have to have things their way, who have to say, I want this, and I want this, and I want things to go this way. But actually the most peaceful people in the world are the people who are able to live with open hands, who are able to say with just, God, I trust you. Whatever happens today, I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to fly off the handle because I believe that you're in charge. And so here's what we're going to do. Our band's going to come up, and I'm going to ask everyone in the room right now, wherever you're at, to just close your eyes and bow your heads with your hands wide open. We sing this song, I will climb this mountain, this greatest difficulty, this greatest challenge of trusting God in our lives, that I will climb it with my hands wide open. And so I'm going to just ask this. If you're in this room right now and you would confess, and it may take a bit of courage, but if you would confess that you're someone in this room, again, with every eye closed and head bowed, if that's you tonight and you're saying, listen, in the last year of my life, in the last season of my life, I've just been struggling with anger. I've just been angry at people. I've been so enraged. This has been just such a problem for me. If that's you, would you just be courageous enough to open your eyes and make eye contact with me? If that's you, I don't want you to be embarrassed. There are people all over this room. There are people everywhere. And just with your eyes open, if that's you, just looking right at me, here's just what I want to say to you. We called this series The Mountain because we believe this is the greatest challenge of your life. The greatest struggle in your life, the greatest challenge, the greatest thing you will ever face is learning to trust Jesus with every little area of your life. And the fact that you're opening your eyes right now says you're up for the challenge. You're ready to do it. And here's the encouragement I want to give you. That you can overcome that anger, that the things people do to you don't have to shape and control the rest of your life. You can overcome that. You can become a peaceful person. You can become someone who walks into every day and says, God, whatever happens right now, I'm going to be okay. But it's going to take you trusting King Jesus above all things. It's going to take you having faith. And so right now, whether you opened your eyes or not, I'm just going to pray over you. And then here's what we're going to do. We're going to gather up here as we always do. And we're going to sing and we're going to lift our hands and raise our hands in worship to the King who is over all things and controls every moment. And simply by doing that, might you just say tonight, I surrender control to you, King Jesus, and I trust you above all things. Let me pray. Lord Jesus, thank you for tonight. Thank you for this space. Thank you for this time. Most of all, thank you for your word. God, your words pierce through my heart in the moments where I'm angry, in the moments where I fly off the handle, in the moments where I'm frustrated and enraged. God, may you continue to whisper to me that you're in charge. You know what you're doing, and you are the King over all things. God, help me, help everyone tonight who opened their eyes just to abandon their control to you, to stop being in charge of their lives, to simply say, Lord, you're in charge and I'm going to walk wherever you go. I'm going to trust you. God, may we be a church that trusts you more tomorrow when we wake up than we did today. May that continue to be something that stirs in our hearts. God, I pray even as we sing now that we would recognize that you are King, you are in charge over all things. Jesus, be enthroned upon our praises as we sing to you. We pray it in Jesus' name, and everyone said,